Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited for this episode. Before I introduce you to our guest, here is a quote just for this episode. Organizations don't have an engagement problem, they have an experience problem. The experience of working for your company dictates the engagement level of your people. Greg Offner Jr., our guest today, has written a book that I highly recommend, The Tip Jar Culture. And uh, first, I like to say that it was a it was written well, and it really speaks something that might be overlooked into an awareness, I think, for people that are listening to the show, people that are working for companies, leading companies. And Greg has been a guest on the show. If you're listening to this, go check out episode 74, season 7. Very different, long philosophical conversation. Episode 180, we do talk about the tip jar and what's to come, but that was before the book actually came out. And now we're going to do a deep dive into the book. But yeah, Greg is a world renowned speaker, pianist, integrator of cultures, and advisor to companies on their culture, on their leadership. And I'm so happy to have you back. Talk about this book, my friend, How to Re-engage and Reignite Your Workforce.
Great to be here, brother. I got to tell you, that first episode, I think, was very different. I had listened to that, I don't know, 6 months or so ago. I was just like scrolling through podcasts as we were rebuilding my website and listening to all the different episodes I was on. And man, just a very different, I mean, it was during COVID, like I think lockdowns had sort of just been going on for a month or two, and we had just found out we were pregnant with our first child. So working in the live events industry, finding out that your cash flow was gone and this new, I don't know what to call the cash expense of a child, but this massive expense was about to be onboarded into your life was really terrifying.
Wow.
And so I actually think I might have had a glass or two of wine while we were talking on that podcast. That was an evening, like a 3-hour evening chat.
Was what during that time, was that when you first started thinking about the tip jar culture as a book, as expressing this idea, or did it come a bit after, or was it you were working on it for years and then it became an awareness? Like, oh my God.
The book was something I kind of did begrudgingly, and I'm glad I did, but I knew it was going to be a lift. I enjoy writing. I mean, we're both interested in philosophy. Philosophy was a component of my college degree, so I did a lot of writing and a lot of reading. So I enjoyed the process recreationally, but to do it professionally was just not something that I kind of thought I was interested in. And I have a bit of imposter syndrome, because I read books by people who are more highly degreed, way more well published and read, and college professors. And I just thought, okay, does the world need another book by some guy who goes, well, this is what I think about things? So if I was going to do it, I knew I wanted to put a bunch of research and time and energy into it. And I just didn't see that being needed until client after audience member would come up after a keynote and say, when can I get your book? How do I get your book? And I would have to tell them, well, there is no book, and I don't think I'm going to write one. And after several of those encounters, I sort of said to my wife, Kim, I was like, I think I got to write a book. And to answer the second part of your question, or the first part, I suppose, like how did the tip jar culture form during the pandemic? I've been really enjoying seeing how the process of idea refinement takes place. Every podcast I went on, let me back up. I started out when I began my career as a keynote speaker, talking about disruption, because I just underwent multiple vocal cord surgeries, nearly losing the ability to speak. My entertainment career, basically, I had to retire from because my voice couldn't handle the demand of 3, 4, 5 hour singing performances. Um, and I just navigated a complete upending of my life. And so I was eager to take the framework that I used, was taught, and that I used to make it through that and help organizations apply that. And then the pandemic happened. And overnight, everyone had a front row seat or was the starring player in experiencing disruption. And it felt like I was in a very crowded market. So I knew I wanted to talk about something else, something that was sort of leading the field. And I felt very passionately about the experience of work. I mean, I worked more than 40 jobs before I turned 30 years old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, I had experienced a lot of onboarding programs, a lot of different management styles, a lot of training programs, and a lot of offboarding experiences. And I unknowingly during that process was interviewing leader after leader, trying to understand how they felt about work and how they had developed their leadership style. So I had a trove of anecdotal evidence to pull from, but I didn't know quite how to package it and put it together. And so as I worked on this material, I started to go on more and more podcasts. And the idea was this was an hour for me to basically talk to a stranger, and by extension, that stranger's audience, and sort of work out my idea in real time and have a really nice volley of back and forth of here's how I see that. And they would go, oh, that's an interesting perspective, or oh, it reminds me of this. And it would send me down a research rabbit hole. And so by the time, I don't know, I started working on this book late 2023. By the time I started writing, I already had this list of source material that I had personally researched and reviewed, more material that I wanted to review and research during the writing. And then I started interviewing more and more business leaders who were already taking an approach that I believed is needed for more businesses, this idea of a tip jar culture. And we can get into exactly what that is later. But long answer there to a very short and simple question, Jay. It's been a journey both in deciding to write the book and getting from where I started as a speaker to now this idea and intellectual property that is the tip jar culture.
You know, you did 40 jobs before 40.
Before 30.
Are you familiar with Robert Greene?
Yes. 48 Laws of Power. Yeah.
That I think that's something you guys share. He had all of these different life experiences all over the place with all these different jobs, and he attributes a lot of his I don't know if you knew that or had ever heard that, but
I
in the
didn't know
back
we
of the
shared that.
book, in the back of the book on page 206 and 7, I challenge the audience that's buying the book right now to go to the back and actually you could look through. You have your entire um like culture map or job history.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for the appendix A, the ghosts of employers past?
um, I thought, quite frankly, a lot of people would call bullshit on me. Oh, sure, you had 40 jobs before you were 30. So here they are. Here they are. And almost, so let's say it's almost 40 actually. So it's 37. Actually, now that I look at it.
Now, what skill set or behavioral tendency, wisdom are you drawing on today from Alberto's Trattoria?
Oh, not much. Not much. I worked that job for 2 days, Jay.
Oh, that's good. Whoa. Well, okay, so that's like huge for the book. 2 days. So my guess would be something between the you and new person, like right. That's the tip jar culture. The were you disengaged, or was it your fault? Like, was the owner saying that person the rest of their life they spend thinking about and telling everybody that works there how terrible that guy was, but then, or was it you realize very quickly, hey, these people don't have it, and this isn't my future. Because I find it interesting that you were there for 2 days, but look what you've accomplished in your life. So I want to unpack that a little bit.
So this was maybe is, I'm not quite sure. Alberto's Trattoria is or was a fine dining restaurant in Westchester, Pennsylvania. So back in the early 2000s, really before Philly was even a powerhouse, but there weren't a lot of fine dining places. It was just a lot of Irish pubs and steakhouses and, burger joints sort of. No disrespect to anyone who owned a restaurant that wasn't that in the Westchester area, but Alberto's was the fine dining spot. It was like where the elite meet to eat in Westchester. And I had gone from working at one restaurant. I don't remember what preceded this particular job, but I do remember that the allure was you would make a lot more money because the check averages were higher because people were paying more of fancy bottles of wine, things like that. And it was the type of restaurant where you had to wear basically a tuxedo. I mean, like kind of a waiter's tuxedo to work there. So very fancy, very formal. Um, and I was not a very fancy, very formal guy. I think I sort of had the athletic guy next door type look, which I guess fit in with most of the servers were all pretty attractive, like, girl or guy next door type people. They were selling an image as much as they were great food. So when I started, I went in for the first day and did sort of a general orientation where you sit down and you study the menu and they introduce you to everyone and you learn where the tables are and what numbers the tables have and all of that. And the second day, so I lie, actually, I think I was there 3 days. The second day we spent in the kitchen. And I think I initially misstepped by calling risotto rice, which really pissed the chef off. I mean, took extreme exception to that and sort of like dressed me down in front of the kitchen crew. And um, I was not very pleased with that. And then the third day was sort of shadowing someone, and so they let me run a couple food items, which basically means take it from the kitchen and present it at the table. I wasn't taking orders, I wasn't really interacting with the guests, and so I took a food item, and I don't recall what it was, but I remember I either placed it improperly or I didn't remember a garnish that went with it. And the maitre d again dressed me down, yelled at me, basically professionally yelled at me. In front of the other staff members and in earshot of the restaurant guests. And I just thought, F this. And I took the apron off, threw it down, and walked out. Never went back. I don't even think I got paid. It was just a bad experience. And I will attempt to take as much responsibility now in hindsight that I probably wasn't mature enough for a role like that, emotionally mature. But I also think I don't know if I say this in the book, but it's something I say very often. Um, unless you're in a surgical theater working on someone's heart, trying to save their life, there are very few jobs that need to be taken seriously. I think the work that we do is serious, but we don't have to be overly serious in the way we approach that work. And I believe that restaurant, that type of atmosphere was overly serious in the way, like it's food. We're giving people food. Yes, we're providing an experience, but you don't have to be a jerk to people just because
Mm.
they're not picking it up right off the bat. So I will if there's two parties in a situation, then two people bear responsibility, right? So I'll attempt to take as much responsibility as I can, but I'll also say it was just a bad mutual fit.
You think you could have been a keeper had that person not demeaned or disrespected?
Maybe.
I'm assuming that I know, I think that I'm right if I say that sounds like demeaning or disrespectful communication. Because you have other people around that creates shame. It's like, do you think it could have been a keeper had they not demeaned or disrespected? Or, and obviously we should define terms, right? Because in the book, leaper, keeper,
Right. Yeah.
um, sleeper, and so on. It didn't sound like you were a sleeper. It sounded like you
Um,
were trying to
it's
work.
So I think right off the bat, Jay. So let's talk about what these terms are. So in the book, I talk about these archetypes, and there are three in the world of performance. Let's back up and just kind of remind or explain to the audience. I spent almost 15 years as a professional entertainer. At least 12 of those were spent working at piano bars and dueling piano bars around the country. So I'm in front of an audience of, on a small side, say 50, 60 people, on a large side, 300 people. I can't go out and introduce myself to every single audience member and interview them for 5 minutes and get to know their personality so that I can perform exactly what they want. So on stage, you have to be able to look at the crowd, take them as this big amorphous blob, and say, how do I understand what's happening out there? And there are three types of audience members I learned. There's the keepers, the people who love to be there. They either love the bar or they love the performer they're there to see. So they're in for it. They understand all the rules and the common courtesies of a piano bar. And then there are the leapers. They're kind of the bachelorette parties, the bachelor parties, the birthday parties, the corporate parties. They may not be regulars, but they're there for a purpose. And it's our job to understand what that purpose is. And so generally it's they want to have a good time and they want to go to the next place. And then there are the sleepers, and they're sort of the wild card because I'm not sure why you're there. You're not really involved in the show. I can't tell if this is resonating with you. You're certainly not clapping along and singing along so those were the wild card that I needed to find a way to get to know. And at a piano bar, you sort of do that over the course of 30 minutes. The quicker you can do it, the more effective and the better a performer you are. But a career could last, 15, 20 years. So in the span of a 4-hour piano bar show, 1 hour could be equivalent to like, say, 10 years or 7 years. All that to say, 3 days is too early to make a determination as to whether somebody's a keeper, leaper, or sleeper. It takes a little bit of time. It takes a little more exposure to somebody than that. So it's hard to say whether I would have been a keeper, but it certainly was a very unappetizing start to a career at that restaurant.
In chapter 2, we're talking about, I believe it's chapter disrupting. There's a disruption of work.
Yeah.
Or you talk about the job, the work as an industry, work as an industry.
If you could think of, and this could be its own sort of like business philosophy book, that chapter, if we really expanded on it. The idea of work means something different to everyone. Why do we work? If you ask that question to 10 people, you'll probably get 12 different answers. But if you were to think of work, meaning doing something for someone else for money, as an industry, just like you would the profession or the industry of law or legal services, or the profession and industry of automobile manufacturing. The way that Henry Ford built a vehicle looks very, very different to the way we build vehicles today. The steps, the amount of steps in the process, the equipment that they're using, the time it takes to manufacture, all of those things look very, very different. But if you look at work, this idea that we go somewhere, spend a set amount of time there, we're paid for that amount of time, and then we go home, it really hasn't changed much in over 200 years. So work, the idea of how we get things done for other people in exchange for money, that needs a disruption. That, I think, is fundamental to the problem most people have with work. And if you go on sites like Reddit or Instagram, you see all these threads or Substacks or whatever they're called, devoted to people trying to reinvent work for themselves on their own terms, whether they're working multiple jobs, whether they're, there's one account that I'm fascinated by their postings, and it's sort of it's called like Lazy Girl Work Boss. And it's basically how to do the absolute minimum at a job and extract the absolute maximum from the employer. And on its face value, I'm not actually going to say that I think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. That's negotiation 101. How can I get the most of what I want without giving up the least? However, why are you working in the first place? This is a thing that we're spending 8 to 10 hours of our life doing. And if your sole job is to do the least of it, your goal to do the least of it for the most amount of money, what's happening on those non-work hours? So it's sort of like if you're not passionate about your 9 to 5, I believe you really need to be passionate about whatever you're doing from 5 to 9 a.m. and 5 to 9 p.m. Ostensibly, you're sleeping sometime after 9 p.m. But wouldn't it also be great in that same vein to do something you're passionate about during the 9 to 5? Why are we not pursuing that more? And I think it's because work, through its lack of innovation and disruption, has become a dirty word. It's become this task that, given the chance, people would rather not participate in, that is seen more as an obligation versus an opportunity. And so through the tip jar culture, my aim is to help employers, and there's a version of this for employees, not the book, but the material, create this experience that people can see as an opportunity, something they're excited to participate in. And that it is not just mutually beneficial, because that's a loaded term, but that is mutually transformative.
What do you say to this? Uh, uh, my goal is to influence the leapers to stay. I want to inspire keepers to grow. I have to gracefully let go of sleepers or help them grow.
I don't know that that's exactly how I'd characterize it. So the goal for a keeper would be to help them stay. Take obstacles out of their way that would otherwise incentivize them to leave. Keepers hate unnecessary friction. Jay, I like you. We work together great. This is a hypothetical. I like you. We work together great. But damn it, Jay, you just keep forgetting to do the things that you promised you would do for me, like check in on that report. It's the death by 1,000 cuts that really makes a keeper leave. I'll give you a great example. I worked for an organization, and I'm not going to name them because I really do like them and I believe in the work that they do. But at some point,
There's only a 1 in 37 chance we'll
yeah,
take
1
that
in
out.
37. So there, at some point, I was absolutely crushing my quota for this company. And they made a change to the sales compensation program that would have slashed the payout at the end of the year by more than half. That, on top of several other small challenges that had happened with that organization over the preceding year, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Because I'd gone to management and said, do you see how I'm literally leading the pack of all of these producers? And now you're about to take, I think it was like $25,000 or $30,000 out of my pocket at the end of the year because of this change. I get that we're being acquired, but I feel like you should honor what you've said up until the point you tried to make this change, not retroactively go back to the beginning of the year. And they're like, well, it's just the way it's going to be. And I left. I would have stayed at that company much longer. I really liked what I did. I really liked the people I worked with. But that was the cut that sent me off. And so the job for any leader is to remove unnecessary friction. That's what the authority's for. So many people get high on titles. I'm a vice president, and don't you know what I've achieved? Nobody gives a shit what you've achieved. You're a vice president to help you get things done for the people below you, not so that people salute you. I mean, that's the point of rank in the military. It's not fet me with giant parties and salute me when I walk past you on the street. You have that authority so that you can get things done, so that you can move the obstacles the people subordinate to you cannot move. So the job for a keeper is to help them stay. The job for a leaper is to help them leap. And that's the mistake that so many leaders make, because leapers are usually some of your best employees. They are your best employees because they're motivated to get to that next level, to that next place. They want to make the leap. If they didn't want to make the leap, they wouldn't be working so hard because they wouldn't be motivated. They are very motivated. The way to demotivate them is to try to convince them to stay because it's better for you as the leader. Man, that Jay is such a great member of my team, and his production every year helps me hit my quota as a manager. And God, if he goes to that other organization or if he gets promoted to his own managerial role, how the hell am I going to backfill that production? I'm going to lose money. Jay, we got to get you to stay. What can I do to get you to stay? That's very selfish of me. To be a selfless leader, a servant leader, one might call that, the real goal is to align with Jay and figure out where Jay wants to go and help him get there. Because when Jay gets there, he will sing about my praises to anyone who will listen, because I helped him. I didn't try to get him to do what was better for me. I did what was best for him. question, or do you want me to talk about the sleepers?
Yeah, what about the sleepers?
So the sleepers, I believe that a sleeper is either a leaper or a keeper who hasn't figured it out yet. And so your job as a leader is to make the connection with them and understand what it is that lights them up about the work they do. There's a question that I talk about in my keynote. Why do you work here? Because you're a great guy, you're talented. You could probably work anywhere. I mean, why do you work here? And the answer to that question tells me so much as a leader. And there are a few other questions, which I talk about in the book, that would come afterwards that help you understand where that person is at and where they're trying to go. But Jay, the job for a leader, talking about these sleepers, is to help them stay, turn into a keeper, or to help them leap. And that leap might be in the most ethical, compassionate, and legally defensible way. You're going to leap out of this company because this is not the right fit. Doesn't mean we treat them like a punk. Doesn't mean we treat them like they're less than. It's just somehow you made it through the interview process. There's a mutual misunderstanding of what was going to happen in this job, and this isn't a good fit. So you can either do the job we need you to do, and I will help you make whatever leap you're trying to get to the best of my ability. Or if you're not willing to do that, it's time for you to leap out of this organization.
What about, so the employer-employee dynamic of taking a sip, leaving a slip,
So the rest of,
leaving a tip, how does that interplay take place?
so they are, in a sense, they're two separate but very related conversations. The first thing a piano bar performer needs to do is understand who's in their audience. And my goal as a performer throughout the evening is to give the keepers what they want, the leapers what they want, and help the sleepers figure out, hey man, are you going to join in the fun? Now, the bare minimum, I would say, at any bar is that you conduct yourself respectfully. You don't bother the people around you. And, maybe there's a drink minimum, have a drink, have a bite, a Coke, a soda, a water, whatever. That's sort of the bare minimum to stay as a sleeper, right? So we're not just going to say, hey, if you don't sing along with Sweet Caroline, get the hell out of this bar. No. But if you start throwing drinks and you start heckling the performers, security's going to come and kick you out. That's our version of, hey, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So once a performer understands the audience, the question then becomes, why are people so engaged at a piano bar? What is it about that experience that makes them want to join in and sing in public? Singing in public is a great fear of many, many people. What is it about a piano bar? And I will say cheekily that sure, alcohol helps a little, lowers the inhibitions a bit, but it's really the experience design, elements of what happens inside a piano bar that draw the audience member in. Excuse me. And so my challenge to organizations is to take these three elements in particular, taking a sip, filling out a slip, and leaving a tip, and incorporate them into the work experience, the experience of employment for their people. And that when they do, they will see disengagement diminish. Because I believe when you hire someone, they are by definition already engaged. They've gone through an interview process. They've been participating in a back and forth of questioning and answering. They're filling out forms. They're doing whatever is necessary to get the job. So they're engaged. Somewhere, at some point in the employment experience, they make the decision to disengage. And that decision is often because these three elements aren't present. And those three elements are take a sip, fill out a slip, leave a tip. Now, that's sort of cheeky piano bar talk. If you were to come into a piano bar, you'd hear what I call the spiel. And so that you walk in and I go, hey, folks, welcome. If it's your first time or your first time in a long time, we're super glad you're here. Listen, a couple ground rules to help you enjoy this experience here at our piano bar. First, we're going to ask you to sing along with us. This is an audience participation experience, and we want you to sing safely. Make sure you've got something to lubricate those vocal cords. We've got a bar over there, whether it's an alcoholic drink or a non-alcoholic drink. Get something that you can take a sip with. That's principle one, take a sip. Next thing I want to tell you about is the request slips you see on the tables or on the bar. Those are so you can tell us what you want us to play, because while we are fantastic musicians, we are terrible mind readers. So if you've got a song you'd like us to play, go ahead and fill out that request slip with the name of the song, the artist, bring it on up to the piano. It's principle two, fill out a slip. The last part of the spiel, always my favorite. If you bring that request slip up to the piano without something green and presidential, I'm talking about money, folks, that is not a request, it's simply a suggestion. Leave a tip. So very quickly at the piano bar, we had to communicate that that's what we wanted. That's what this back and forth was going to require for an engaged audience. Now, what does that mean in the workforce? Well, taking a sip, when you go to a bar, you take a sip, you often talk to the people you're with. You're getting to know them. You're finding out what excites them, what they're passionate about, what they're looking forward to. That's the kind of communication we need to take place in a workplace. That's also fundamental to understanding whether your people are keepers, leapers, and sleepers. So that idea, like I said, of the audience archetype being separate but tightly related, that goes almost hand in hand with the first principle. Take a sip. Second principle, fill out a slip. Even though I'm the musical expert in the room, I've played at many more piano bars than most of my patrons have ever been to. I still give the power of song requests to them because they are psychologically, and because of that request, because of that tip, financially bought in. They are committed to this experience. We both have a vested interest in this night going well. There's collaboration. And that's what I invite organizations to bring into their fold as well. True collaboration, not just top down, do this because I'm the boss and I said so, but true collaboration. And then that last part, leave a tip, is incentive. Incentivizing impact, or in many cases and in many industries, it's just simply demonstrating the impact that someone has. I think it would be great if everybody made more money. Money's great. Money helps people do things. I think it'd be great if some financial incentive were tied to the daily performance of jobs. Like if everybody had what salespeople have, a sort of quota. So if you do more, you make more. I think that would be great. But in some organizations, in some industries, it's not feasible. But wouldn't it also be great to just see the value of what you're doing? I know that there are so many people out there, I'll call them keyboard jockeys, basically sit behind a computer all day, they tip a tap type and click the mouse, and who knows what happens on the other side, but at the end of the day, they get to go home and on Friday, a paycheck shows up. After a couple months and years of that, it almost feels demoralizing, and you go like, what the hell am I actually doing? What is changing out in the world because I'm here? This is a bullshit job, they might say. I think it's incumbent upon the leader in an organization to continually remind and demonstrate and show people, when you do whatever you do for our organization, here's what happens next in the world. And here's what that's allowing to change or to make better, or a problem that we're solving out there. People are passionate problem solvers, and leaders need to remind often their people, what is the problem we're solving? And look how we're solving it. And I will say, just as an aside, that problem is not making shareholders richer. I do not know a single employee who gives a large F-word expletive about making shareholders richer. Just they don't, unless they themselves are a shareholder. But they do care about solving the myriad problems they see out there in the world day to day. So show them that. Make that the guiding star of why people come to work each day, and disengagement will dwindle and diminish and disappear.
What's been the feedback on these helpful metaphors?
Largely positive. I'd say overwhelmingly positive. I in fact encourage and sort of look forward to the negative feedback or contrary opinions, because it helps me grow. This is based on all the research that I've been able to do, been able to find. I mean, some of this stuff dates back to well before the 1900s. But it's certainly not the end of the story. And in fact, we were talking, you and I think via text message or maybe on the phone, like sort of the frustrating thing about writing a book is the minute you hit publish, you learn something new the next day and you're like, well, this is dated information. So So I get the luxury of bringing the most up-to-date information to audiences on stage, but that doesn't discount the value of what's in here because there's so much more in here, meat and research and ideas and other resources that people can use than I can talk about in an hour on stage.
It's awesome. I challenge the audience to re-listen to this episode, pick up the book on Amazon, Tip Jar Culture, um, invest into it, read the book. I'm really enjoying it. And please listen to episode 74. I really think it's another, you're just, it's such a great episode. And episode 180 of the Culture Matters podcast to continue growing with us together as we follow this experiment called the Culture Matters podcast. And so I'm thankful that you've come back, my friend. And I look forward to the next book on chapter 2 and the next time. And I am curious, what's your word for 2023?
Growth.
2023. What was your word?
Oh, what was my word for 2023? Oh, I don't even remember. If I had to guess, it would be perseverance. Man, I took on building a new website, releasing a new speaker reel, writing a book, and we had another baby. So it was like in any year, just one of those things would be a lot for a person to go through. So I
Uh,
don't recall what it was, but if I could choose it now, it would be perseverance. And in this year, it's growth.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for listening. Please leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast. Pick up that book, and we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.